Oteli Edwards spoke to Transport Minister Chee Hong Tat and Associate Professor Walter Theseira from SUSS on News Tonight about the various transport plans. Now, she also asked Mr. Chee what the expansion of the rail network would mean for commuters.
So first of all, for the fare formula, the expansion of the MRT network and the opening of these new stations will not change the fare that is computed from the fare formula, because there are a few components. There's the consumer price index, there's the wage index, and then there's the energy index, and then we also have a productivity factor and a capacity adjustment factor, which are already fixed, the last two, the productivity factor and the capacity adjustment factor. So this will not affect the fares, but it is a valid question to ask, how do we, as we expand the MRT network, keep our maintenance costs sustainable? And I would say we will focus, together with our operators and the workers and the unions, on three important T's. The first T is technology. I think we have to look at whether there are new ways to enable us to do our work more efficiently. Condition monitoring, that means you monitor before the part actually fails, and then you can intervene and you can replace it before it fails. Data analytics, artificial intelligence, these are all tools to help us to be able to lower the cost. Second is to focus on talent attraction, talent development, because we do need to attract engineers, technicians to be part of our workforce. And the last one I would say is teamwork, because this effort is not just something that can be done by SMRT or SBS Transit. It has to be done together with LTA, together with our vendors and suppliers. So the whole ecosystem must have good teamwork.
And part of the ecosystem would be the taxi industry. And Mr. Theseira, I just want to bring you in here. New measures are being introduced. We heard in the package earlier to ensure the stable supply of taxis. They include taxis staying on the road for 2 years more, requiring less frequent inspections. Can you just tell us how much, in terms of the cost, can taxi drivers save? And also, to what extent do you think you will keep them going?
So I think first, if you look at, for example, the move to increase the statutory lifespan of taxis, that's really important, because that's basically putting them on the road for maybe about a quarter more of their lifespan. So I think the key after that is, now that the cost to the operator has gone down, basically you have to work with the operator, the government has to work with the operator to make sure that the reduction in cost trickles down to the drivers in the form of more competitive rentals, because that is actually part of the equation to ensure that taxi driving is still, something that is chosen by drivers instead of private hire vehicles. But to take a step back, I think there is a broader issue here. The broader issue is the competitiveness of the taxi industry and choosing to be a taxi driver versus the private hire industry. And I think for the operators, it is a bit of a challenge choosing to put more money investing into taxis, because they are simply not as flexible under the current rules as private hire vehicles are. For example, private hire vehicles, they can be disposed of, converted to private vehicles, sold off, but with taxis, your operator is stuck with them until the end. So it's a very tricky decision to make to expand your fleet. And for the drivers as well, choosing to rent a taxi versus a private hire vehicle, one of the issues has been that the street hail monopoly, which is the one advantage taxis have, it isn't that lucrative. And when you look at the fact that if you rent a private hire vehicle, you can use it for your own purposes as well, that's very attractive to some drivers. So I think at the end of the day, the government is not in a good position to decide what is the right mix of, taxis versus private hire. It's up to market forces, but they can certainly try and adjust some of the levers a bit.
I just want to add on, I agree with many of the points that Walter has made. But there's something which is very close to my heart, and that's why we wanted to make sure we take a look at what we can do. And that is, we do have commuters out there who are not so familiar with technology in using the app to book a ride-hail service. Our seniors, for example. So I think that's very important. We must make sure that they can continue to have access to point-to-point service. And taxis, street hail, or just calling for the taxi service, that remains, I think, an important service for our seniors.
And just want to move on to talking about, you talked about a one-off increase, right, Minister, to the car population. I think a lot of us would want to know, what can this one-time increase in supply do to stabilize COE prices in the long term?
Well, Telly, we don't approach it from COE prices as the end in mind. When we take a look at our car light strategy, I think that still remains valid. Singapore is land scarce. We cannot keep building roads. Roads are already taking out 12% of our total land space. So we can't keep building more and more roads. And so therefore, there is a need to have a cap on the number of cars. But the question here is, do we set it at the current level, or with usage-based pricing being another tool to manage traffic congestion, can we allow a one-time increase? That means we rebase it. We lift the population of the vehicles to a higher level, but it is still zero growth. After that, it is still car light. So we still want to encourage public transport as the main mode, the walk, cycle, ride, as our main mode of transport. But if we are able to, through a combination of the current ERP and also distance-based charging in the future, use usage-based pricing as a tool to manage traffic congestion, then we might be able to allow increase in the vehicle population without the risk of traffic congestion.
What do you want to weigh in on that?
I mean, I think the way I would think about it is that we all know that if we have more access to vehicles, that's going to be good for people who get hold of those vehicles, right? They will be able to satisfy their economic or social needs better. But there is a very important trade-off that the Minister mentioned, which is that the more vehicles there are on the road in Singapore, the more costs all of us are going to have to pay in the form of congestion, the harm to the economy that causes and so on. And I think what's really interesting here is because of the advancements in technology, especially ERP 2.0, there is a possibility of pushing that frontier, that trade-off a little bit further, so that we can ideally have maybe a bit more expansion of the vehicle population while also not having everything come to a standstill in Singapore. I think that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah. So, Minister, help us understand this, because you're talking about having this one-off increase of the population, and yet at the same time, the government is also trying to get people to drive less. So, is there a little bit of a contradiction there?
Well, okay. So first of all, I think what we are really trying to do is to make sure that we don't end up with traffic congestion. And yet we are able to support people's aspirations to buy a car. So if we can allow that, it means you grow the car population and yet you avoid traffic congestion. That would be ideal. Now, how to avoid that? One of the key things in traffic or in planning for connectivity, for transport, is you want to avoid the supply and the demand all coming together. So during peak hours, for example, and that's really what our current ERP tries to do, it is usage-based pricing, but location-based and time-based. You're trying to encourage people not to drive through certain congested areas at certain times. But if they want to drive at other parts of the day, during other parts of the day, that's fine, because you're not causing congestion to others. But during peak hours, we're trying to discourage you. So same thing for distance-based charging. You are trying to shift the economics of it to, rather than charge you a high cost from ownership, we can allow more cars on the road. We can allow more cars to be owned, but not necessarily more cars on the road, because people may not want to drive as much because of the charges. But I do want to highlight this, Oteli, which is something I mentioned in Parliament. It is not straightforward, because the trade-offs on different groups we need to study carefully. There are certain groups who drive more for a living, and we do need to study what is the impact on them.